Hey guys, back for another video. It's going to be something completely different today. I'm going to be doing talking to camera, showing training peaks, some of the software I use behind the scenes, explaining some of the terminology used. This will probably be a series of videos because I've tried recording this 3 times now already, and it turned out to be just way too much information. So I'm going to break it down a little bit, and today I'll just be doing like a glossary of terminology. And then in later videos, I might explain some more details like how to set up your season's annual training plan, the ATP, up here, and what Training Peaks can do for you. This is not sponsored. I do pay for Training Peaks myself. I've used it for nearly 3 years now, but I think it might be handy just to kind of see some of the statistics and so on that you can get beyond kind of your standard Strava. Or something like that. Yeah, so I mean, in terms of software, I do use Strava. I use it as like a social platform just for seeing what other people are doing. It's a really good way of finding routes that other people are doing in your area with the Strava heat map, and just keeping track of what you've been up to and chatting to people, so on. I use MyFitnessPal, the calorie tracking app. I have that synced to Training Peaks, so when I do workouts in Training Peaks, my calories burn for the workout goes over to FitnessPal, and that way when I'm tracking calories, I know how much I've got burnt off that day that I need to allow for. I don't always use FitnessPal, but mainly when I'm trying to lose weight like I am at the moment. So I've got another 12, 13 kilos to go at the moment, so I'm using it for probably the next few months, 6 months or so. So Training Peaks has a lot of features. It has a lot of data and a lot of number crunching. It comes from a cycling background, and some of those statistics are a little bit more cycling focused or power based. With running, it works fine for running. Just bear in mind that for some of the very specific statistics, they make more sense for cycling, or at least for road running, where you have a much more constant velocity and constant effort level, and you're not allowing for like running over routes and through rivers and so on. And there's a little bit more variability in trail running that can throw the numbers off a little bit. That said, it's still super handy and useful thing to have. So today I'll just be explaining what intensity factor is, your form, how to know when you're in form and ready for a race, how to do a taper with this tool, your CTL and ATL, which is your critical training load, and acute training load, which is like fatigue and fitness. I'll explain all this in a minute. Yeah, and I'm just going over the terms really. So the first things, if I just go through to they have a thing called the PMC, the Performance Management Chart. I believe you only get that when you pay for Training Peaks. I don't think you get it on the free version. Now, this is my dashboard which I've set up. There's a lot of information here, which I'll go over in a separate video. But for now, I'll just show you the PMC. I have 2 PMCs actually. I have one which is like unified, and then I break it down, so I kind of have 3. I have one for just biking, one for just running, and one for everything. The reason I do that is because sometimes of the year I do a lot of biking, sometimes of the year I don't do much, and because of the rates of the levels going up and down, if my running is going up and my biking is going down, it kind of overall can be neutral. But because they work different muscles, you can, if you're doing a lot of running at the moment and you haven't done biking for a while, you can look at the overall one and say, oh, I'm not that fatigued, but you are actually quite fatigued for the running specific muscles. So I actually have a few different filters set up, but I'll show you just the overall one for now. So this is the PMC, the Performance Management Chart. As you can see, there's quite a lot going on here. I have this set to the previous 180 days and then forwards 45 days. So these dotted lines are projections, which is just basically if I did no exercise from now on, what these lines would become, which is super handy for tapering. I should start with the intensity factor, the blue dots. So every time you do a workout in Training Peaks, it will work out an intensity factor and a thing called a TSS, which is just a number given to your workout. The bigger the number, the harder the workout. It's not as simple as like how long the workout was, because if you have a short workout that's very hard, you'll get a big TSS number. If you have low intensity, but it's very, very long, you'll get an even bigger TSS number. But the TSS number is essentially how hard the workout was. And you'll get when you do the ATP for your year, it will break it down by week, and it will say, here's how much TSS total you should do for the week. And then you can work backwards to how much you should do per day. But we'll get to that in a later video. I should probably mention that for TSS there are a few different forms of it. There's like a running TSS, which is pace based. There is just what they call TSS on its own, which is actually power based. And then there is an HR TSS, which is heart rate based. They all come to roughly the same value, but they're using different definitions of what your maximum is. So like the running one will say if your pace maximum is X minutes per kilometer and you're doing 50% of that pace, then you'll get a 50% TSS. Whereas if your heart rate was, say, 80% of your maximum heart rate, you'd get a different one. They should come to about the same. In reality, for trail running, they often don't, because the running one, which is pace-based, often doesn't make a lot of sense for trail running, because you'll be stuck in rivers and mud and so on. You're not actually progressing along the road as fast as you would if you were on tarmac. So for trail running, you often find yourself changing it over to HR TSS, which can be a little bit more accurate. For me, I use a power meter. I have a Stride power meter that fits on my shoe. So I'm actually using wattage output for both cycling and for running. When I do my Swift races on my bike, it's using a power meter and it's working out how much power I put out for how long. And it basically does the exact same thing when I'm running. I'll do that on nearly all my runs, unless I'm crossing rivers, because the Stride is not completely waterproof. But it's okay for puddles and splashes and stuff, so I'll use it on nearly all my runs. Or I'll just take it off when I cross a stream, put it back on again. So I'll start with intensity factor, because that is used to calculate the TSS. The intensity factor is basically how hard did you go versus how hard you're able to go. So TrainingPeaks will know what your threshold heart rate, your threshold pace, and your threshold power if you're doing power. It will know what your maximums and your thresholds are for those, and then it will say what percentage of that did you do, and that will come to an intensity factor. So a 1.0 intensity factor would be you went 100% as hard as you could for this entire duration. Obviously, the longer runs you want to be lower in intensity, and in reality is for running you tend to want to be about 0.6. About 60% of your maximum would be your long runs on the weekends or whatever, and then like 0.8, 0.85 would be your kind of harder efforts, your intervals and hill sprints and things like that, maybe 0.9. But you'd obviously, you don't want to be in that middle 0.7 territory, because that generally means that you're in that grey area where you're not down in zone 2 and you're not up in zone 4 or above on your heart rate. You're sitting in that weird zone 3, and this is something I have a lot of problems with, and it's partly because there's a lot of hills around here, and partly because I'm just not very good as an athlete. I'm just not very good at judging this. So if you look at these blue dots, you'll see a lot of them are in this kind of 0.8 territory, whereas I'm trying to get them down near 0.6. So I do spend quite a few that are in that grey zone, so I need to sort that out. Next year I'm going to try and do a better job of either making them down low or up high, and try and clear out this 0.7. It's on this blue chart axis, sorry. Try and clear out that middle area so there are not so many in the middle. You have to make sure that it does know what your current thresholds are. There are some tests you can do for that, which I can explain in a later video. They don't take very long, and they're really good at just working out what your maximums are. That will give you an intensity factor. The TSS is basically the intensity factor times the time. So you know how hard you went. Well, how long did you do it for? If you go 50% effort, but you do it for 7 hours, you'll get a higher TSS number than if you did 100% effort for 30 minutes. The TSS is basically just these red dots, and it's literally just how hard was your effort. So most of the time, mine will come in. This is on the red axis. Most of mine will come in at about 75-ish a day, or 60, 60-ish, something like that. There's a big one up here, which is the 340, which is the Tarawera race I did recently. But most of the time, they'll come in pretty low. Okay, so that's intensity factor, and we've covered TSS. TSS is just a number given to each workout. Next up, I will explain CTL, your critical training load, which is also called your fitness. It's the number that you want to be as high as possible on race day. It's how fit you are. Essentially, it's how much load are you able to take. What's your average workout intensity? If you're a professional, you'll be doing 110 or so TSS every single day, day in, day out. That's 7 days as well. That's allowing for rest days. So you'll probably be doing a bit more if you have a rest day. So for me, I'm at like 55, 57, something like that at the moment. So I'll be doing on average 55 per day, allowing for rest days. Now I have at least 2 rest days. Well, I have 1 rest day and then I have a day that's strength. I don't record strength on here. So effectively cardio conditioning wise, I have 2 rest days. So I'm doing 55 average, allowing for that, which is why most of my runs are coming in at sort of this 75 territory, somewhere around there. So CTL is a 45-day look at the history of your TSS. Basically, if you increase your average, you start doing harder workouts, longer workouts. Eventually, your TSS will increase. It will slowly increase because it's an average. So if you start doing like this massive TSS here for the Tarawera, will have increased my average over 45 days, but it won't have increased it a ton. If I kept doing things like that every day, then it would increase a lot more. Obviously, I'd get injured. So your CTL is the kind of long 45-day look at your training load, and it's represented on this graph as your blue line, the blue kind of shaded area. You want to see that getting higher over time. And as you can see, if I stopped working out right now and I didn't do any workouts, it's going to drop, because over 45 days it will drop down to 0 because there would be 0 TSS recorded. This is really handy because you can hover over dates and you can see what your form will be, which I'll get to in a minute, but your form is basically how race ready you are. Moving on to ATL, the acute training load, which is also called your fatigue. It's the same thing as the CTL, but over a shorter period. It's only over 7 days. So the reason this is important is because if you suddenly jack up how much you're doing, say I started running 50k every day, the fatigue will go straight through the roof immediately, because those big numbers will affect the 7-day average way faster than the 45-day average. So it's basically how tired you are, how much have you done in the last 7 days. And that's 7 days, Wednesday to Wednesday, Monday to Monday, whatever. It's not Monday to Sunday. So bear that in mind. The reason you need to know these two things is because basically what you're getting numbers for is how much do you normally do and how much have you done recently. As in terms of load, how much would you typically have done over the last few months, and how much are you doing in the last week or so? How much are you doing recently? Have you suddenly started increasing or decreasing? Now, you obviously want to be getting fitter. You want your blue line to be going up, which means you want the amount you're doing to slowly be increasing. And this is where these charts come in handy, because how do you know how fast to increase or decrease or taper or so on? How do you know that, like, last week you did 50k of running total, what should you do this week? 55, 60, at what intensity? Say you did a 5k really fast. Okay, that's 5 of your 50k you were intending to do this week. Is there 45k left? Maybe. But if you did that 5k at race intensity, you may already be well on your way to filling up your weekly total of how much you should do. These charts just look at fatigue and load. They don't really care so much about time, distance, so on. It's just about how tired you are, and it's really good for predicting race day readiness. So, looking at these lines, the yellow line is your form, which is the difference of the pink and the blue. So basically, how much have you done over a long period will be your blue, how fit you are. How much have you done over the last 7 days will be your pink line, and then the difference is the yellow line, basically. If you suddenly jack up how much you're doing, your fatigue will shoot way up, and your race readiness will shoot way down because you'll be exhausted, you'll be not ready for race. It will be a negative number. Now, when you're training and it's not approaching a race, you're not tapering, you want your form, the yellow line, to be a negative number. You want it to be about -10, -15. I try to keep it around there because any more than that, -20 plus or -20 and less, I'll get injured, basically. I know I will because it's happened in the past. So I try and avoid these -30s like this. This is dangerous territory for me. These spikes are bad. I try and keep it around there-ish, -12, somewhere around there. When you approach a race, you'll obviously do less training. Your fatigue will start dropping quite quickly because it's only a 7-day look at your load. Your fitness will drop a little bit because it's a 45-day look at your load, it will drop slower than your fatigue will, which means your form will slowly come up into the positive numbers. And a perfect example, I can show you the taper here that I did during this period for the Tarawera. So, a week or so before the Tarawera, I was down at -21, 0, -21. I was doing some long runs ready for Tarawera. And then about this point here, I started tapering off and bringing my form up all the way up to race day where I was +18. So I was ready for the race. And, I had -1, 6. So I was doing short runs here. The intensity factors were lower than they have been. The actual TSS numbers were pretty low. And I was slowly increasing my form ready for the race. So I knew I'd be race ready on the race day. And as you can see, my fatigue, which was quite high at 82, I slowly brought it all the way down to 34. So my fitness dropped off. Before the race, a week or two before, I was actually 61 fitness. And on the day of the race, I was down at 52. So I'd lost 10 just in my taper. You will lose some in the taper, that's normal, which is why if you target a race day fitness of like 80, you'll want to be like 92 or something before you taper to allow for losing a little bit. You get it most of it back anyway because the race intensity is the TSS for the race is so big that you'll shoot up on the race like I did here. But obviously you have to have a week afterwards or so, which is the week I'm in now, which is why my fitness is dropping at the moment because I'm in recovery week. It's Sunday the 16th at the moment, so I will be tomorrow starting to train again and slowly bringing this back up, ready for the next year's ATP. ATP is an annual look at stress and load, and I will explain that in a separate video, I think, because I tried doing this all in one big video and it was just way too much information. So hopefully that'll give you an idea of what intensity factor, TSS, your fatigue, your form and your fitness, what they are and how they relate to each other, what they mean in terms of training. And to execute a taper, it's as simple as bringing your form up into the positive numbers, as close as you can to race day. Some people like to do a short, sharp taper where they basically just stop training a few days before the race entirely. Some people, they like to do shorter runs for a bit longer and just let that taper last a bit longer and come into form slower. You don't want to have it too slow because you're losing fitness all the time. So you don't want to have a 3-month taper. But some people do a week, some people do 2 weeks, some people do a few days, and that can depend as well on the distance of the race. But this is a matter of personal preference. I personally do about a week and a half to 2 weeks. The first week I make it just less intense. The second week I'll start having more rest days and doing stretching and so on and bringing that intensity down. And about 3 days before the race, 4 days before the race, I'll be using this chart entirely to dictate how much I do, because you can use the dotted lines to work forwards to race day. So if you'd said, I want to be +20 form for the race, and it's currently Sunday the 16th, well, I can go forwards on here and I'll be like, okay, well, if I wanted to be +20 form, I know that if the race was Thursday, I need to not do any more workouts because otherwise I'll be underprepared for the race. I'll be overtrained. And you can use these lines to predict out how far you'll be for race day. So I just keep doing little workouts until race day has the numbers that I'd want, and then I know to stop and start focusing on getting carb loaded and stretched and all the other fun stuff that you do for a race. Hopefully that'll give you an overview of what the numbers you can get out of Training Peaks are. It's not meant to be a kind of sales pitch for Training Peaks. It's not sponsored. I pay for this myself, and I've used it for a few years. There are a lot more information here, but I'll come to that in a separate video. So hopefully that'll give you an idea of what you can get that's beyond just Strava's kind of social scene for tracking your workouts and loads. Hopefully you'll find this interesting. Let me know if you have any questions, and there probably will have some questions. Then just leave a comment and I'll answer all of them. That's no problem. And cheers.